Good evening, ladies and germs. Reichle here. Haven't had much to say in recent weeks and months, and not feeling very talkative at the moment, but I do want to document the purchase of my new Casio Privia PX350 piano, which looks like this. It's pretty straightforward. It has two built-in speakers. Here's one, and here's one. It has a built-in USB port that you can plug a flash drive into or other USB accessories. The action on this particular piano, I have local turned off at the moment, was by far the most pleasing of all of the digital pianos that I looked at, including the Roland F20, the FP50, the FP80, the Roland P105. I played all of these, and amazingly enough, the Casio felt the most natural. They're faux ivory keys, they're weighted. It's a tri-sensor system that it really felt like and sounded like to me the best emulation of acoustic piano, so I bought it for a reasonable price. What's turned out is that it's using my MIDI setup, which I have put together and designed probably over 20 years ago. Still I have functioning here, and I wanted to show a little bit of what that is. This is a 22 space rack on the bottom, and this is a 8 space rack on the top. They're not configured the way that I had them originally configured when I lived in Columbus, but I've reoriented them several different times. But basically the MIDI system that I invented and implemented here still works, probably 20 years later. It's pretty straight ahead for the most part. Whenever I designed this MIDI system, I wanted, for the most part, to have a solid piano, bass, and drums system so that I could record jazz with the MIDI instruments, and it would sound reasonable to listen to. I used originally a Yamaha TX1P sample piano module, which I've used all these years. It's one of the first ones to have ever come out in the 1980s. This is a Roland U220, which I use for upright bass, which is the best upright bass sample that I've ever found. This is a MIDiverb 2 that I use. It has a very pleasing digital reverb, also one of the first affordable digital reverb units that came out back in the 80s. It cost about $450 way back then. That basically was the heart of this piano trio. Acoustic piano sound coming out here, acoustic bass sound coming out of the U220, and the U220 in the back has got 6 sets of inputs. There's a main, out, left, and right, and then there are 4 other outputs that you can choose multi-timbrally to route different sounds to their own individual output. So what I did is I have the bass sound coming into my channel 2 on this Mackie mixer. I have that EQ'd with the bass turned up just a little teeny bit. The mids are pretty much all the way off. The treble is pretty much all the way off, and I have the bass panned to about 10 o'clock, and that produces a really realistic jazz upright bass sound. The first input on this mixer is a Shure SM98A miniature condenser mic, which is this. This cost me about $200 a good 20 years ago, but it is a miniature condenser mic that with a clip that I got from Audio-Technica that you can clip on the bell of the trumpet. It comes into input 1 of the Mackie mixer, and when I record into the computer I use Alt 1 and 2 outputs. You can't see that because the headphones are in the way, but these two right-angled jacks are taking Alt 3 and 4 out. And what happens is when you push the mute button on one of the Mackie channels to mute that channel, it automatically will send that channel to these alternative outputs 3 and 4. So it mutes the sound coming through the main bus, but sends them alternately to these two, which is what I use to feed the computer to record. And I mute the output of the computer while I'm recording in, or you'll get a feedback loop. This worked well for many years. This is the first Mackie mixer that I bought. So Shure SM98A miniature condenser mic, Roland U220 sampled upright bass, which is very clean. Normally the outputs, stereo left and right audio from the Mac computer, come into these channels here. The next 4 channels on this mixer are stereo. This is the TX1P. This is the Roland U220, 2 other outputs that I use for strings and guitar and various other things. And then these last 2 inputs in stereo are 2 RX-17 drum machines that are exactly the same. One channel is dry, one channel has reverb. And I have these drum machines mounted in the back of this rack. You can see the wood back there. There's a platform, and 2 of the drum machines are mounted, and I have them panned and balanced and muted so that one drum machine is providing the dry sounds and one drum machine is providing the wet sounds, so that I can have a dry kick drum and then a wet snare drum. And because those drum machines only have 1 set of stereo outputs, it was the only way that I could achieve that was to use 2 of the exact same drum machine, because they don't have individual outputs. That's the original piano, bass, and drum. So my RX-17 down here mounted in the back, those were my drums. U220 were my bass. The TX1P up here is my piano sound. Now, the synths that I also had that were not part of this original trio, but as I started to expand the MIDI setup, I've got up here in a different rack. Here is a Yamaha TX802, which is basically the same as a DX7 II. Slightly different architecture. Here's a Roland Sound Canvas SC55. Here's a Korg Wave Station, which is vector synthesis, which gives you a little joystick that lets you in real time morph between 4 different samples, and then you can record the movement of that joystick to create some very interesting sweeping sounds, which I've never done. I don't use this very much at all because it needs some new samples in it. I was able to replace this LCD panel, which had gone bad. I bought that online and bought a new soldering iron. I was able to open it up and fix that, so now that I can see the sounds. This unit here is a Roland P330, which is a slightly less expensive version of the Roland MKS20, which was a workhorse piano sound that you can use in bands. And here's the Korg SG rack, which I use in my live rig, and always liked the sounds in this slightly not so expensive unit. I bought a backup unit whenever I needed to change the battery, because the battery in the SG rack is soldered to the board, so that as soon as you take it out to change the battery, you're going to lose your programs. And there's no editor Librarian for the SG rack because it was made back in the year 2000. It's almost 15 years old. So I bought a spare unit on eBay that was in really good shape that had the battery changed. And when it came, I dumped my programs from the unit I'm using downstairs into this. And then I took and I had the battery changed, and when I brought it back, I dumped the programs from this back into the other unit. So now I have 2 duplicate units that both have my patches, and the same is true for the P330. New batteries, 2 units, one that I use downstairs. They both have identical patches, so I've got 2 units in case one goes down. I've got the patches saved in the other. So those synths are going down. Obviously there's not enough inputs on this original Mackie mixer to bring those synths in, so I'm going to go down here to my bottom rack. Here's my second Mackie mixer, and I bought it originally because it is for the EMU percussion module, which is after I got a little more cash. I still use my RX-17s for drums because the Latin percussion samples on those machines are superior. But the percussion provided an updated unit for more modern drum kits. And the outputs of the percussion are individual, so that your different instruments, unlike the RX-17, can have their own output so that you can pan them and EQ them separately. So I had to buy another Mackie mixer, which is this one. This nano bass module, it makes bass sounds, comes into the first channel of this Mackie mixer. And then the rest here, the next 1, 2, 3, 4 inputs are for my drums. So this second input is the kick drum. This input is the snare drum. This input is the hi-hat. And then the next input, which is in stereo, is my tom-toms and my cymbals, which are in stereo. And each of those have their own EQ, and they have their own reverb. So the kick drum I can make dry. The snare drum has got some reverb on it. I'm sure that the cymbals have got some reverb too. So this is a dedicated mixer, 4 channels for just my drum module. Input 1 is the nano bass that has a lot of bass sounds. I don't use that often. And then the inputs for these synths need to come in somewhere, so I'm running them all the way down, and they're coming into the stereo inputs here. So in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are the TX802, the SC55, and the wave station, and I still don't have inputs yet for my SG rack and the P330, so I have to figure out how I'm going to get them into the mix. What has turned out interesting is here's my laptop that I'm running, Digital Performer, with a very simple Uno MIDI interface, which is 1 in, 1 out. Here's Digital Performer. If you can see it, I have a sequence programmed here. And the Casio Privia is my master controller. So I take MIDI out, that goes into the Uno, that goes into the computer, which then shoots the MIDI signal out, and obviously with only one MIDI out of the laptop, how are you going to divide that signal so that you can get MIDI into each one of these modules? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 modules that all need MIDI inputs on different channels. And the way that I was able to solve that problem, because several of my MIDI patch bays decided to die, was this old device, which is a Digital Music MX28M, and it's a manual MIDI splitter. So I've got 2 MIDI inputs, and I've got 8 MIDI outputs. So each one of those modules is being fed its own MIDI information on a separate channel, and I can turn them on and off with the flip of these little switches. So that, I found that on eBay used. It really saved my life in terms of getting the system back up together. So when I record, obviously I play the tracks in from this keyboard, and you change sounds up here on Digital Performer. So I would choose I have the modules laid out here, and I have sounds picked. So I have acoustic bass, acoustic piano, strings, U220 drums, RX-17 drums, percussion drums, TX802, SC55, the wave station, the nano bass, and the SG rack. And all you have to do is just drop any one of those into record mode on the computer, and then you play that instrument from the keyboard down here. Normally I would listen to this, I would monitor the mix through the headphone output jack here, the Mackie mixer. Oh, by the way, this mixer on the bottom, I use its 1/4 inch outputs come and feed into auxiliary 1 input on this mixer. You've got 2 effect sends. One of them is charging the reverb unit. The other one you can use as a receive, so I have to daisy chain this Mackie mixer, so I use its analog 1/4 inch outputs, and I come into the auxiliary in, which I have a knob for here, so that's the way I daisy chain those together. You would think that I'm looking like I almost need another mixer. The interesting thing is, I've only had this preview for 2 days now, is that when I bought this digital piano, my needs for it had changed drastically over the years. I didn't want an expensive stage piano that didn't have speakers built into it, with MIDI master controller functions and very heavy and weighted keys. I've been playing those on the ships, the RD 700 and up. I didn't want to spend that kind of money, and I didn't need that kind of an instrument. I wanted something that was going to look more like a regular piano and spend most of time in my home. And I also wanted built-in speakers so that I can just walk up without having to hook an amp up, turn it on and play. And the Casio Privia ended up satisfying all of those demands. It has a built-in stand, so with 4 wing nuts, basically it is very piano looking. It has the rail on the bottom that's got 3 pedals. These were things that I decided that I wanted to have. I didn't want an expensive stage piano that you have to put on an X stand or some kind of stand that you carry yourself that feels very unlike the piano. I wanted to sit down and, for a change, have it feel like a piano so that I can play more pianistically the way that I've learned to be a better pianist, rather than playing like a keyboard player as you do in a band, having to overplay. The action helps inspire you. So this instrument really was perfect, and the whole point really why I was going to do this little particular video is one bell that it has is that it actually has inputs. So I have 2 1/4 inch outputs, which is great. I've got MIDI in and out, which is great. But I also have 2 1/4 inch inputs that allow you to bring sound into the keyboard that will play through the speakers. So in a stroke of luck, because I don't have a monitoring system set up here yet, I play most of the other things in this room when I listen to albums, which are these, or if I listen to cassette tapes, which are these. If I watch the TV set, which is here, I monitor all that stuff through my stereo. So I have a stereo receiver, and the funny thing is that I take the output of my VCR, which is here. I have basic cable. I don't have a cable converter box. And the audio outputs of that VCR feed into my computer interface, which is this Mark of the Unicorn Audio Express. It's a little digital mixer, and it was a clever way that I found of being able to get the sound of my TV VCR into my stereo. So it 1/4 inch inputs comes into this little digital mixer, which has got a choice of inputs and outputs, and then one of the output sets I've got is coming into one of the channels on my stereo amp. So I've got those labeled here. If I want to hear the TV or the computer, I hit this. I have my mini disc, which is also hooked up here through a channel. I've got my tape deck here. When I listen to FM through this Luxman receiver, I push that. I got a turntable, and I got my CD. So this is just a 20-year-old Kenwood stereo receiver that really sounds good and is functioning right now as a nice monitoring system. When I listen to the radio, I've got quadraphonic sound, so these are Boston acoustic speakers. Here over in the corner is a JBL bookshelf speaker. Here's another Boston acoustic, and here's another JBL speaker. So I get to listen to quadraphonic sound, so it sounds very nice. I don't have a way yet actually to monitor this MIDI rig, and I don't necessarily want to put that through the stereo because that's a lot of live uncompressed signal that at one time I shorted that Luxman amp out. So what did I discovered tonight, which ended up being very convenient, which is to take the 1/4 inch outputs of my mixer here to monitor, and I plugged them into the Privia, which is here. And now when I play my sequence, everything that's happening in the MIDI rig, all the synth sounds, the drums and everything, which I have mixed in stereo into a final product, I'm playing them back through the piano so that you can hear them through the speakers, and I wanted to play that just a little bit because it sounds good. So that basically is sounds that are all being triggered here. The percussion is making the drums. All of these other units are being triggered via MIDI, playing different parts. They're being mixed into this mixer here, and I'm taking those outputs and I'm playing those, and they're coming through to monitor through the Privia. And everything is being generated by Digital Performer, which is a program that I bought 20 years ago and produced a lot of CDs on, and this will probably be the 3rd version of that I've got. You can see the LEDs flickering as the MIDI sounds get triggered in that big rack. So, anyway, that's my system as it's coming together finally after all these years. Thanks a lot, and take it easy.